Brent swung his axe at his foe, but missed. His opponent was too nimble and lashed out with a pair of short blades. The steel weapon struck Brent in the side with a flat, and did not draw blood. The witch hunter knew the signs, and didn't need to spill unwanted blood. He cursed the situation as he eyed the witch behind her charmed protector. It was almost resolved peacefully, but a big lug fell for the witch's spell. Gritting the situation, the witch hunter made his move. Welcome to Mythical Phylogeny Adventures. I'm your guide, Jason. Today, I'd like to take a look at the witch hunters themselves. Let's look at the tools of their trade and what they would mean for a fantasy world. Witch hunters have a complex history and origin. They have had many different backgrounds before turning to witch hunting. Some were clerics, others lawyers and historians. Many turned to witch hunts to advance political careers and gain renown, but some took to the calling after misfortune befell their families. Many had ties to the Spanish Inquisition. Some, like Matthew Hopkins, did it for money. Was there an organized group of witch hunters? Well, not really. But there were a few self-appointed individuals with titles such as Witch Hunter General. But those which were sent by the Church or the Inquisition had titles through those. Usually, it was only a small group operating together, usually 3 at the most, rather than a massive multi-layered organization. As we talked about on the video with the witch hunts themselves, not everyone was in support of the hunts. Many officials were against the hunts. In Vienna, 1583, the witch hunter George Schur had to fight against the mayor in order to execute the accused witch, Elizabeth Pleinarcher, but to no avail. Matthew Hopkins, I mentioned before, was eventually accused of witchcraft and had to undergo his own interrogations with his own techniques. You also have the bloodthirsty Pierre de Lancry, who executed an alarming 80 witches in a mere 4 months, with him speculating thousands more. Thankfully, he was dismissed by the people seeing his true colors. Among the known techniques were the popular ducking. This was where people were put underwater and held there, usually with their hands and feet tied. The idea behind this is based on baptism. If a person floats, the water and Holy Spirit is rejecting them, and they are a witch. But if they sink and are accepted by the water, then they are God's child. Another technique was sleep deprivation, usually by making them walk all night long. They claimed that this was to prevent them from summoning a familiar. Now, sleep deprivation is well studied and has some rather important side effects. Trouble thinking and irritability are common in the early stages. It is the late stages where issues come up, namely hallucinations, difficulty speaking, impulsiveness, and impaired judgment. They also use torture techniques employed by the Spanish Inquisition. Needless to say, some of the cruelest inventions ever fall into that tactic. The greatest weapon they had was fear, though. Peter Binsfeld was a great example of that. If anyone ever voiced dissent with his fanatical witch hunts, they would find themselves on trial as a witch. The evidence used in witch hunts were, well, suspicious at best. Hearsay and rumors, testimony from victims, and the over-ambiguous marks of a witch, such as a birthmark, an accent, eating too much, swearing, indecent dancing, and keeping toads and lizards. Well, I guess the swearing would make me a witch here. Even the word of a young child was enough for some witch hunters like Roger Noel. Prior to him, the accusations of children under 14 weren't used in most witch trials. Now, the reason that children's testimony wasn't used was thanks to another witch hunter, Alonso de Salazar Frias, one of the most conservative of all witch hunters. He was one which campaigned for requiring more evidence of witchcraft. Of the over 7,000 accused witch trials he was involved in, only 31 were convicted, and only 12 were put to death. Those could have resulted from pressure from his two peers he was working with on the investigations. A varied sort of people become witch hunters. Some were decent, but many were cruel. We have the Archbishop Johann von Schoenberg, who used a witch hunt to purge his lands of Jews and Protestants, in addition to witches. Yes, the witch hunts were a tool for many things: persecution, racism, making money, and political maneuvering. But they weren't facing down real witches, just hapless victims that landed on the wrong side of a person in power. But what happens in a world with real witches, real magic, and real danger? Well, I talked in the witch hunt video on two situations: minimal and maximum magic, and we'll need to look at those again today. With minimal magic, finding a witch will be more difficult to achieve. Magic is limited, and only a few have access to it. Under this condition, magic will again become mistrusted, and suspicions will grow. This means witches will need to be careful of exposure while practicing their arts. If they bring harm, then a witch hunter will be brought in. And how they would work would be complicated. First up, these can't just be a bunch of politically hungry brutes looking to make some coin. Sort of. They will need to be trained. Most likely, witch hunters will be trained as some sort of religious warriors. With many families in the medieval era, some children would be given to the church. Orphan children, but also those of nobles wanting to prevent complications in the line of succession. In our world, many would join the church, but in a fantasy world, if determined that they have the necessary personality, they may be sent to be trained as a witch hunter. These could either be employees of the church or the crown perhaps, and would be financed through a stipend, but could also be paid according to the job. Paid for each witch they bring in. They could either be cloistered at a church and dispatched with suspected witches, or there could be wandering witch hunters who continuously look for witches. What would the training focus on? Investigation first up, mental training, observation, but also espionage, stealth, and interrogation would be imperative. And yes, that may include torture. The covert skills would be needed to sneak into gatherings and houses to collect information. This would be the first step to exposing witches. They will need to learn public speaking. They will need to be charismatic to get people on their side, to get them to relax, to tell them what they know, also deducing secrets. There is a good chance that they may try and infiltrate the coven. This will require a lot of talent to pass themselves off as a witch. Horseback riding may be useful for traveling and chasing down fleeing witches. Ideally, they may want to operate in groups. This would allow them to watch each other for being influenced by a witch's curse. Having a party is always better. After that will come combat. What weapons would they use? Of course, we could go with the traditional swords, axes, and maces, used by most warriors. But the witch hunters may go with other tools. A whip is a common tool used in torture. Crude, but that offers a few things: range and pain with minimal damage. That is why it is used in torture, but it isn't ideal for finishing a fight. Not enough stopping power. Knives can be used in close quarter, and are concealable. and were used to make small cuts with torture. Potentially, this would be an option for them. Now, a rod of judgment or gavel-like weapon is an option, but is similar to a mace. A bow or crossbow could be an option with minimal magic. It would offer a range attack if they don't have any themselves. This is more of a practicality thing over a theme. On that note, tools of a mob may fit. Pitchforks and torches. Not the best weapons, but usable. While they would know how to use things like a rack, an iron maiden, or a heated rod, those aren't the best in a fight. Too big and cumbersome. Well, the last one can be used, but it would cool off before getting into a fight. Now, would their training involve any magic? This is a lot more complicated, and depends on how magic works in a fantasy world. If the only way to gain magic is through birth or contract with the devil, probably not. But what about faith magic? Power born from a divine source. The god which you serve. If that can occur, then yes, the witch hunters could have magic. So what kind would they have? Well, what they need is protective wards. Something to keep them from being cursed and incapacitated. If not, it would be too easy for them to be taken down with one spell. A dead witch hunter isn't a very useful witch hunter. In addition, their magic could be wholly in fire-based. Healing would be useful for reducing casualties with torture. It also allows them to inflict pain and treat the wounds. If it expands enough to break curses and cure diseases, that would be perfect. But that might land in the world with maximum magic most likely. On that note, we have issues with maximum magic. Their training may cover the same topics, but their implications would be different. These witch hunters would be a form of law enforcement, yes, to protect people and prevent situations. People who find it a calling after losing a family member. Rather than hunt anyone with magic, they would focus on particular schools of magic, say necromancy. These schools of magic would need to be considered repugnant to society and seek to be purged from the world. If they can break spells, they could be called in to remove curses and resolve other situations. Otherwise, the function remains the same. And this brings up an issue. How would it influence politics? I talked about this with the witch hunt video, and that witchcraft wasn't always banned, but accepted by some. In a fantasy world, magic becomes a tool, and something that nations may go after to gain power in war. But if witches aren't universally despised, then that can put witch hunters in trouble. While they seek to purge dangerous individuals, the nations may be protecting them. This could lead to conflict between witch hunters and kings, and through them between the kings and the church. If a war breaks out between the church and the king, it creates plenty of issues. But if the church wins, a theocracy could rise up, where it is the church that governs. But if the king wins, we could watch the religion become banned. But if the witches are malicious, they could then influence the king and take over the nation. Not a good situation potentially. But let's say witch hunters are given their duty by the monarch, which means we could have multiple factions of witch hunters. Different schools with differing techniques and beliefs. Lastly, we have the issue of corrupt witch hunters. Those who abuse their positions. There could be a high risk of this under the theocracy I mentioned before, where the witch hunters would basically become a constant inquisition. These witch hunters could be used to take out political rivals and insurgents, ensuring that the theocracy remains. Those that only use it to make fame and fortune. Those who make false accusations to build up their reputation or for their own bloodlust. Those sorts of individuals would still occur, no matter how hard they try to prevent it. But this brings up another issue. Each time one of those witch hunters makes an accusation, erodes the overall trust of witch hunters, and could very easily land their order with disdain and mistrust, thus making it harder to work and better for the witches. Far from an ideal situation. Overall, I feel that a witch hunter would be a fine class to sit in alongside the cleric, barbarian, bard, rogue, and other such classes you commonly find in a fantasy setting. They would serve as an anti-magic specialist with melee attacks mostly, maybe some healing options. What do you think, adventurers? Does this sound like a suitable class to join your party? As an ally, they could aid you with either ties to the church or the king, but those same connections could just as easily land you in trouble. Ideally, there would be a lawful good, or neutral lawful alignment, but the corrupt ones would find themselves in the chaotic category. Brent charged at the witch hunter, but he was waiting for it. Dodging under the oversized axe, the witch hunter dashed forward, his eyes locked on the cackling witch. The hum of magic surrounded her as the witch hunter flung his knife. It was swift and struck true to the witch's heart. She collapsed to the ground. Brent stumbled as his mind cleared from the witch's spell. The witch hunter moved over to tend to the injured man. Another victim of the witch. The history of the witch hunters is complicated to say the least. While some did expose corruption, many just made situations worse in our world. Yet they could be essential in a fantasy setting. Thank you for watching, adventurers. Please return next week, where we shall look to Pegasus. Until then, I'll see you on the roads.